This is an English bitter that's only, it's right at 4% alcohol, so it's a fairly low alcohol session beer. As you can see, it came out just really nice and clear and not highly carbonated, which is preferable for an English style bitter.
The art, you talk about the art of brewing. It's all about its creativity.
There's a lot of alchemy that goes into it, because you can try to predict how the ingredients are going to interact with one another.
If you know your grains, then you can tweak it based on your own knowledge.
You can express a lot of creativity. You can take a recipe and say, I want to change that a little bit. There are no rules.
Think about beer, what beer is made of. It's made with grain and yeast. And the immediate thing you think when you think about grain and yeast is bread. It sounds like you're making bread, grain and yeast. And a very smart guy named Fritz Maytag, who's with the Anchor Brewery in San Francisco, actually did a study on, did some research on what came first, beer and bread. And it turns out beer came long before bread.
It was pivotal to, first of all, the agricultural revolution, which is what helped create some of the earliest urban societies in Sumer, Babylonia, and then Egypt.
They made this big batch of some grain, for a big party with their family. They put hot water on it, tasted good. They left out overnight, all went to bed happy. Overnight, the yeast guy got in there. And what happens is yeast converts sugars to alcohol, okay? That's how beer is made. So the next morning, some people got up, and there's this cold leftover porridge, they decided to eat it. It tasted a little sour, but sour is not a bad flavor. They ate it, and having never had alcohol before, probably started doing the happy dance, and beer was made.
I'm going to be brewing a Scottish export today. About as simple as all grain brewing gets. You have your recipe, you have your ingredients, you need to mill the grain. That breaks the husk of the grain so that when the grain is steeped, that the starch and sugar will come out of the actual grain. The next step then is you have to mash the grain that you've milled, and the mashing process is simply heating water and adding the heated water to the grain at a certain temperature. And maintaining that temperature.
You might not have the technical knowledge that goes with the ingredients, but at the same time, being ignorant in that regard can create, marvelous brews.
You start with something small, get your technique down, and then you graduate into, you have a lot more control over what you're doing.
The actual process of making the beer in my own kitchen was really enjoyable for me. I actually just got, I was making ramen noodles in the kitchen before that. Now I'm making beer.
Beer developed mostly through Mesopotamia, areas where grapes and honey weren't popular, because you make wine with grapes, you make mead with honey. Where there was barley, they made beer. In Germany, early on, they would make a form of bread and steep it in water, and that became beer. A lot of the early beers in Germany were really chunky things. You'd scrape off the stuff on top, and the beer would be in the bottom.
It was then pivotal in the Industrial Revolution, which is some of the biggest, earliest industrial companies were actually breweries, especially the Porter breweries in London.
Things are going pretty well in the United States until the disaster, which happened in the 1920s, or 1930s, called Prohibition. Changed everything. If you couldn't sell beer, you couldn't stay in business. And almost overnight, we lost all of our breweries in the United States. The breweries that remained, the guys like Budweiser, Coors, Pabst, stayed open by making other things, pharmaceuticals, things that they could do to keep their fermentation tanks going and keep barely in business.
The next step in the process is setting the grain bed. I'm just recirculating the liquid that's in the mash tun, and I'm going to keep doing this until I see that it's running fairly clear. Like you can see right now, there's quite a bit of particulate that's coming out of it. And as soon as that clears, the grain bed sets, it acts as a filter, and then we'll get good clean wort coming out of it. Wort is just unfermented beer. You drain that wort into your boil kettle. You then boil the wort, And the boil process sanitizes the wort, it caramelizes the wort, and also you add the hops. And the hops are added in various stages depending on the type of beer.
Yeah, you can throw tons of different ingredients in, like table sugar, spices, anise, cinnamon, cardamom, orange peel, coriander.
It's like cooking. You're tweaking the recipes. It's all about flavor and making something that everyone enjoys.
And yeah, you can just have fun with it because you're not producing beer for a mass market, so it's pretty much what your tastes are for that particular beer.
The wort that's in the boil kettle is still at near boiling temperature because I just shut off the heat source. So it's running through the counterflow chiller with cold water running in the opposite direction. And that is chilling the near boiling wort down to right at 70 degrees. 70 degrees is important because that's the optimum temperature for this particular yeast to work at. Any colder and it would be very sluggish or not work at all. Too warm, it's going to be real funky, or it's going to just not work at all. It'll actually kill the yeast if you get it too hot.
The end of Prohibition, there weren't very many breweries left. But they had to get back in business quickly, and what they did was dumb down their beer to the maximum extent possible because they had to get a wider group of people drinking their beer, had to get their market share back as quickly as possible. So they did the lowest common denominator, made light beer without a lot of flavor, without a lot of alcohol. How it all came back was the hippies.
President Carter in 1979 repealed one of the last vestiges of Prohibition, which was to say, okay, you can now legally brew at home again. When he did that, it released this pent-up creative energy that resulted in hundreds of thousands of people brewing at home legally, and which quickly led to people saying, hey, I really like the beer you're making at home. Could you make some of that for me?
A book came out called The Whole Earth Catalog that talked about living with grain, living on the farm, and had an article in there about how to brew beer. And those ex-hippies who want to go back to nature started brewing their own beer.
All those homebrewers started small businesses, and we went from fewer than 50 breweries in America in the late 1970s to today having more than 1,500.
The U.S. is the greatest place in the world for beer. To find so many different styles of beer, this is a place to be. You go to the Czech Republic, and there are basically light and dark. Okay, we've got a carboy full of wort. I'm going to take it into the fermentation room now, put this sanitized cover on the carboy, and we'll take it inside where it's going to ferment. Shake up the yeast real good.
I've been home brewing since the early 80s, probably around 82 or so. Got into the home brewing hobby as a microbiologist who wanted to show my father that, who didn't understand my research work, I wanted to show him what microbiology was all about and what all his bucks went to pay for.
I actually read in the Washington Post a little blurb about this club. So I called up the membership person and said, I'm kind of interested in that. And I came, that's probably 12 years ago.
I basically was doing home improvements and was kind of tired with that. And so I wanted to do something that dealt with raw ingredients and finished products in a similar process, and making beer fit that moniker.
Well, this is the part of the utility room that is devoted to beer and brewing. This is a beer refrigerator, and this is where I keep my hops.
I started homebrewing when I was in grad school because I did a little analysis of my personal expenditures. I was looking for a way to save money. I was living the typical meager student livelihood of, the ramen noodle diet. And I said, well, it looks like most of my discretionary spending is going towards beer. And I don't want to reduce the amount of beer I'm drinking, but I need to save money.
I went to college. You go to college, you get interested in beer really quickly, and I was always a big beer drinker in college. I was fortunate enough, I worked for the Navy, and I was fortunate enough to be transferred to the UK for a year. I lived in London for a year. And when I was in London, I learned there was a lot more beer in the world than Milwaukee's best.
This is my fermentation chamber here, or lagering, I should say lagering tank. I use it for fermenting by cranking the temperature up with an external thermostat. And you see I got an American barley wine, a Baltic porter, an English barley wine, a couple of bocks, and a mild in here right now. It'll be full. That'll be, the refrigerator will be full, and the garage refrigerator will be full in not too much time. Well, according to the computer program that I use, that's my 284th batch on that program, but before I got that program, I probably brewed 20 or 30 batches before that, so I'm well over 300 batches of beer. I started brewing my beer. I was relatively successful brewing some extract beers at first and quickly graduated to all grain brewing and developing designing and building, and believe me, I'm not a designer or a builder, but just by trial and error, building my own equipment, and I now brew regularly. I brew 20 to 25 times a year and brew many different styles of beer. I've even brewed some of the styles I don't care for, just to be able to say I experienced brewing them.
Speaking of which, the best part about home brewing is that you've got this whole group of people who are more than happy to share whatever you make with them. It's a great social outlet.
What I find at joining a homebrew club is a vast variety of people from different walks of life. I mean, we have lawyers in this club. We have people that worked in high government. We have Coast Guard people. We have military people. I work for the Navy. We have Department of Labor people. People of all walks of life. We have janitors in the club.
I gravitated to this group because of they're just really smart people. And I like really smart people.
We have guys in this club that make their own bread. We have people in the club that have their own beehives, that make their own honey. We have coffee makers that roast their own beans for coffee in the club.
It's just fun, and people like music. We have meetings. We have people bring their instruments.
It's a combination of art and science, and that's what keeps me intrigued. I've been doing this for 13 or 14 years now, and I'm still just as excited about doing it today as I was 13 or 14 years ago. If beer hadn't been invented, I mean, I don't know, I'd probably be in prison or something. I'm not really sure.